Well, thank you, Tony. That was really the best introduction I could have had here. Anyway, so my name is Matthias Noback. It's pronounced in Dutch like that, but you've already heard some other ways of pronouncing it, like Matthias or Matthias. Anything is good, really. Matt just suffices. And in case you want to find me on the internet, most handles, also the Twitter handle is Matthias Noback, just like that. This talk is called the Naked Bundle, and you may be wondering what's that all about. So maybe you've Googled it already and you found this Naked Bundle by Sally Mackenzie. Some very interesting titles there. The Naked Duke, the Naked Earl, the Naked King even. But no, this talk is about Symfony bundles, of course. Yes, we are on a Symfony conference. And this is really what an actual naked bundle looks like. Just a couple of files, the bundle class, the dependency injection folder, the configuration, the dependency injection, or the bundle extension class, and of course some configuration files in resources config. So I could have easily called this bundle light, maybe. Or the no-code bundle, since there is almost no code inside this particular type of bundle. Maybe even just the clean bundle, since it's very easy to maintain such a small bundle, because, well, what is there to maintain, really? All the moving parts are outside of the bundle in separate libraries. Still, naked is, of course, a bit more catchy and even slightly controversial, so I've picked that one. Let's take a quick look at the official view on bundles. Like Tony mentioned, the documentation is full of things about the Symfony framework, and it mentions many things about what is the bundle system really. One of the names of bundles that have been coined recently or very early in the process of designing Symfony 2 is first-class citizen. So bundles are really first-class citizens, or so the documentation says. And a couple of lines below that, at the end of the day, your application code is just as important as the core framework itself. And this triggers something in my mind about importance, really. I think your code is way more important than the framework's code, which is just an implementation detail, another phrase that you might have heard earlier. Then reuse, which is also mentioned in the documentation. Bundles are first-class citizens, yes. This gives you the flexibility to use pre-built features packaged in third-party bundles or to distribute your own bundles. This is really cool, or nice. But at the same time, the documentation also says this. Like I said, well, each bundle implements a specific feature, and each directory contains everything related to that feature, including PHP files, templates, style sheets, JavaScript, etc. Well, this actually contradicts the great promise of reusability. So putting everything inside a bundle, it's not going to help reusability, of course, since many applications out there don't use Symfony, even though I cannot imagine that too, but yes, it's true. And you basically limit reuse of your code and your other resources to Symfony applications by putting everything in a bundle. So something else that is not really true, it's that in Symfony almost everything lives inside a bundle. And really, many things don't live in a bundle, they live inside libraries. For instance, Symfony components themselves are libraries too. They are not really part of the full-fledged framework. And I really think that is already quite a good thing. So you may have heard that idea already around, like yesterday in a workshop or maybe earlier today. It's called the libraries first approach. So you start to develop your core like model services, and then you start looking for a framework that is going to wrap that. But what about things like controllers, entities, and templates? And so a whole list of other things that you may really think have to be inside a bundle to be useful at all. Or do they? I really think that we can move many more things outside of a bundle than you can imagine. So this talk is trying to explain the ways in which you can do such things. So let's strip the bundle. Let's make it naked as possible. Don't get me wrong on this. I really love Symfony, as you already know. I wrote a book about it, so I've been working with Symfony for quite a while, and I've been loving it every day, maybe even more every day. So I think you can call me a Symfony 2 developer, which makes me quite tightly coupled to the framework myself. But that is also why I'm looking into other communities recently, like Laravel community, the Drupal community, just to learn about how they do their jobs and to see how they use Symfony in their frameworks. But after all, a framework is just a framework. So this is true for everything. Like a conference is just a conference. But really, a framework should be just a quick starter for your project. You should be quickly to go working on what really matters to your project. It should prevent you from making some big security mistakes. It should also help you solving really big existing security problems. And it should have or has a community that you can rely on. And please notice the fact that I have emphasized your and you in these phrases, because I really think that the framework is there for you. But at the same time, your code doesn't really need a framework. It's perfectly possible to write code without a framework, as you probably know and have done for many years. So this is Noback's principle, as I coined it. Code shouldn't rely on something it doesn't truly need. But there are really many things that code can rely on which it doesn't really truly need. Like bundle conventions. So things in a bundle often rely on conventions to work. They need to be in a particular place. They need to have some kind of a name to be able to load or to be even found. But at the same time, conventions aren't really necessary at all. You know that conventions are just there for convenience, right? So according to my own principle, code shouldn't rely on bundle conventions too. And that's really important. Just to give you an idea of what I see as bundle conventions are some things like this. Naming conventions, controllers, their classes have to have the suffix controller. The action methods in controllers should have suffix action. Templates should be located in resources views inside your bundle. Their name should be controller/action.html.twig. Well, so many other naming conventions there. There are some structural conventions, like controllers are supposed to extend the framework controller class, and if you don't extend the controller class, make them at least container aware. Well, that's just a convention. Some behavioral conventions, like the controller is allowed to return an array, which will later be used as the value for template variables. Actions can type into objects, which will be fetched based on route parameters. Well, that is some really cool magic there. Yeah, configuration conventions use lots of annotations. You probably do that too, which is fine, but I will show you how to get rid of them in this talk. Well, this example just got quite out of hand, but it's really copied from the actual documentation of the framework extra bundle. So what's funny is that if you open an existing project and you start looking at directory structures and file names, it becomes apparent that this is the way you recognize a Symfony 2 application. You will recognize it by the naming conventions that were followed, by the locations of certain files, by the names of directories. And you will immediately see, this is a Symfony 2 application. You won't be able to recognize what the application is about. You will just be able to recognize the framework that was used. Well, as already mentioned, I wrote this book, A Year with Symfony. It started out actually as more than a month with Symfony. And I thought that this was quite a good title, but as soon as I was talking to people about this, and I was trying to say more than a month with Symfony, and it was just difficult for my mouth to do that. So A Year with Symfony is much better and faster. Also, the range of topics expanded quickly, so it had to be A Year with Symfony. It has almost 1,000 readers currently, ebook readers, but also 200 or 300 printed edition readers. So I'm really happy with that. It also marks the 1 year with Symfony moment. And I'm going to celebrate with some really nice prizes, free books and free little notebooks with some nice mosaic on the front. Also, I'm going to revise some chapters of this book, so keep an eye on it during the next month. But what's really interesting today is that I look back at this book. Of course, I don't have it in my mind completely, so I always have to look up where does it stand, or where do I say this, or do I even say this in my book. I write that it becomes apparent that bundles are mainly treated as ways to extend the service container, not as libraries of code. It's really interesting when you look at the code base of Symfony itself. Yes, you will recognize that bundles are ways to just to add services to the service container. Another way in which bundles are used is to expose resources from that bundle directory. Yes, so bundle exposes resources. This is just part of the complete list of resources that a bundle exposes to your application, like service definitions, controllers, routes, templates, and so on. As I already said, I really don't think these things have to be inside a bundle. And when you would place these things outside of the bundle, maybe in separate packages, the bundle would become really small. And this allows you to distribute bundle-like things. For instance, you could really create very quickly a Laravel package to be used in Laravel applications, or Zend or Drupal modules, or even Cake PHP plugins. I'm not sure if that framework is used anymore. But the idea is that it should be very easy to do so. Right now, when you want to share a bundle with another community, another framework community, it will be almost impossible, since they won't have the bundle structure in their, the bundle system in their application. So you would have to do all kinds of things to make your resources or your code available in such applications. So the challenge today is, at least for me, is to make the bundle as clean as possible and to move all the misplaced things, right? I'm very strict about this, but well, I'm also friendly, of course. So don't think I'm very harsh to other practices out there. Well, let's move those things to a library, which I call something that is not related to a framework. That library may have some other dependencies, like other packages. Maybe you want to require a specific PHP version or a PHP extension. But let's agree that we don't require the Symfony framework bundle, since that will pull in the entire Symfony framework. What's really important here is that I want to be realistic about reusability. I know there will never be ideal reusability, so it will always be within PHP applications. But even then, it will be hard to abstract from things like HTTP-related classes, like request response, maybe. So I want to depend on some common things, and I think it's perfectly fine to choose those libraries, like HTTP Foundation from the Symfony components, and agree that we can depend on those libraries. Otherwise, well, we can take steps to even remove that dependency, but that will be too hard, really. So reuse, as practical reuse, I'm more thinking about reusing your code in a Silex application or in a Laravel application. And the allowed dependencies, well, in fact, it's only one allowed dependency. It's HTTP Foundation. We are going to use the request class, the response class from that package, maybe use some exceptions from the same package. That will be just fine, in my opinion. We are also going to rely on something, or not really rely, but we are going to trust in the fact that there will be an HTTP kernel, something like this, which is able to handle a request by calling some kind of a controller, and then the controller should return a response object, and that response object will be sent to the client. So what's really behind all this, the naked bundle thing, or effort? Some of my secret missions. like you will hear people say, let's rebuild this application, but this time we will use Zend 4 instead of Symfony 2. Well, this will happen in a couple of years, of course. I really think this should not be necessary at all. You should be able to reuse most of your project and just replace some classes at the boundaries of your application, which are in particular framework dependent or framework related. And so it will be entirely no problem at all to choose another framework in the end. Maybe you like the way Zend 4 will work much better than Symfony 2 does. Of course, right now Symfony 2 seems the very best out there. Of course, I agree with you. But it's very likely that maybe that will change, or maybe you want Symfony 3 and that will change in ways you didn't expect to. Another reason why I'm trying to do things like creating naked bundles, and I do, even in my daily work. Another reason is education, really. Just all the blog posts I write, the book I write, it's all about education. In particular, it's about coupling, and I really want developers, and I really think it's necessary for them to have a very strong coupling radar. This is what a coupling radar looks like. You will see some things to which your application is coupled, and most of the time, these coupling things, these dependencies, are very explicit. So you will notice them very easily on the radar. Once you scan through your code, you will notice some explicit dependencies like function calls or classes that you use, maybe files that are included. But at the same time, there are also many implicit dependencies that are much more difficult to spot just by looking at the code. Things like file locations. Does your file have to be in a particular location relative to the root of the project? That would be an implicit dependency. Would your class or file or method name need to have a very particular name or a suffix or a prefix or any structure? That would be an implicit dependency. Is there something about the structure of the return value? Maybe your controller should return an array, but it should have at least 3 keys or something like that. Those are very implicit dependencies or very implicit coupling issues. And it takes some years of experience to notice everything that you depend on, which is not explicit, like uses or functions or classes. So you will have to constantly practice your coupling radar. And this talk is one example of something that will help you practice the coupling radar. So there we go, trying to create a naked bundle. This is what a regular Symfony controller looks like. Again, if you encounter such a controller in the wild, you will immediately recognize this is a Symfony controller. First of all, when we are trying to create naked bundles, we don't want to depend on anything that is inside a bundle, since this controller is to be used in other applications that don't have a bundle structure. And the first thing that we can notice about this controller, what's wrong in a way, is that it extends from the framework bundles controller class. And since the application we are moving this controller to is likely not to have the framework bundle installed, or we even explicitly forbid this, yes, we have to remove that at some point. Also, using route and template annotations and other kinds of annotations, well, they actually come from the framework extra bundle, so we are not allowed to use that too. So this is our to-do list for now. We are not going to rely on those things that will likely not be available in another context, like this parent controller class and the routing template, etc. annotations. Once we remove all that, we have a very nice and clean controller, which I like very much. But this is not very useful at all. Once we are zooming in a bit on the code of the actual controller, we will notice that lots of things are happening inside it. We are using the request as an argument. We are fetching some kind of a service called the doctrine service from the service container. It's available, it has been injected automatically, and we can use this get to fetch that service. It uses a parent function, like the create not found exception, and it returns an array of template variables. Well, this should have been a response, of course, so an array is not something that is compatible with the response class. So yes, we have to do something about these things. So first, we are going to inject dependencies. I'm sure you are familiar with the concept. I assume you are mostly Symfony 2 developers, so you know about the Symfony injection or the dependency injection component and how you can configure the service container to inject the right dependencies. But I also want to not use helper methods from the parent controller class anymore, since that class won't be available, of course, so we have to do something about that. We are also going to render the template manually, instead of relying on some kind of an event listener to convert the return value of the controller to an actual response. And we are going to keep using the request class. Well, that's not really a to-do, but we already agreed on this. We are going to depend on the HTTP foundation component anyway, so we can just as easily use its request class. Well, first, injecting dependencies would look something like this. We want constructor arguments like this, the entity manager. Well, that's really easy. We are, instead of using the helper method from the parent class, we can just as easily throw an exception on the spot. Then, to render the template manually, we will need some extra things like the templating engine, which we are going to call manually. Its render method requires the name of the templates and the array of template variables, which previously was just a return value of the controller. And then once the template has been rendered, it's just a string, so we have to wrap it inside a response object, which happens, well, it's also very easy, it just happens there. The only problem here is that we still have the string bundle in it. Well, it's the name of the template, and we are referring to a template called new.html.twig in the directory resources views article of my bundle. So that is something we have to fix at some point. Well, but what have we gained until now? Well, something like this. We have only 4 uses at the top of the class. And the good thing is there is no mention of a bundle in it anywhere. So we are already able to move this controller to another project if you'd like, or almost. Well, what's happening most of the time when you try to do things like dependency injection with controllers, when you have controllers as services mostly, it's something we can call dependency overflow. You will have long lists of dependencies because each of the actions of the controller actually needs other dependencies to be able to do its work. What's the cause of this? Really, it's again convention. It's the convention in many Symfony applications that one controller should have many actions. So you have this concept, like in our case, the article controller. It's the concept of article. And then each of the actions is related to that concept. It does something with that thing. Well, that's not really interesting at all, but like new, edit, delete, maybe add a comment. I think that we would be better off to have one controller, one action, or in fact, to combine them or to make them the same. So a controller is also an action, or an action is basically just a controller. And this is how we can do this. We have, instead of an article controller with a new action, we would have a new class, which is in fact the controller and action at the same time. And we put it in the controller directory and then inside another directory called article. So we basically move things around a bit, and then in the end we use invoke as the magic method used to indicate that the object can be executed or can do something, can be invoked. So that's really nice. I think this is this already, even if you don't want to create naked bundles at all at work, I think this already helps your project structure very much. And this is what you end up with, like inside your controller directory, you have an article directory, and each of the actions has its own file. And so when you are looking or browsing through your project, you will easily see what can you do with an article. Well, yes, you can create a new one, you edit one, etc. As you may have noticed, I just removed the @route annotation at the beginning, and I just assumed that there is a way of injecting constructor arguments for your service. Of course, we have to fix that. Currently, the controller won't work. So we have to set up routing, and we have to create a service definition and provide the right arguments for our controller. And the nice thing is, these are actually things that we want to put inside the bundle. So let's call it bundle stuff. I like to use services.xml because XML is really nicely, well, it's really strict. So you will have like nice auto-completion, but also you will know immediately when you're doing something wrong, since there is a schema for it, and it just tells you which elements, names are allowed, and attributes also. So yes, I really wish the world was more strict too. Maybe that tells you a lot about my personality. Yes. So we create a controller service, the new article controller. We provide the class. We provide the right arguments for it. And then once we have this name for our controller service, it's new _article _controller. We can easily set up some routing for it too. Again, let's choose XML. And this is what XML routing looks like. I didn't know it before I was first trying the XML stuff. Just like the YAML routing is very easy to use, so well, this looks more complicated, but again, it's much nicer. So what you have to do is to add the default key controller and provide the name of the service and the method that should be called once this controller should be executed by the framework. There is a nice pull request by Kevin Bond. It has been merged already, but it's going to be available I think in Symfony 2.6. It allows you to leave out the __ invoke part of this, so that will make things even more nicer, good looking. So what have we achieved until now? The controller can actually be anywhere. So until now, it was still located in the bundle, but we can move it to a library. And this library will have its own dependencies, like an entity manager class. It will, or at least Doctrine ORM. It will require the templating engine from Symfony. Well, not really many more things. It also doesn't need to follow a naming convention anymore. We can, like I just told you, we can remove the controller class. We can even remove the action from the method name. Well, instead, we use invoke there. We use dependency injection, not service location, which is good in itself. And well, now in the end, this controller is actually reusable inside any application that uses HTTP Foundation, like, for instance, a Laravel application or a Silex application, which was really the goal of this exercise. So next up are entities, another very famous part of bundles, usually. Entity conventions are, well, you have to put them in the entity directory of your bundle. And you have to use annotations, or you have to use, well, I think most people use annotations for it. But what is really wrong with annotations when it comes to reusability or portability? Well, annotations are classes. Just like you saw, I have to use I have to import the namespace, and then I can use the classes in that namespace as annotations. And the way annotations are processed in an application are like this. So you have the annotation reader from the Doctrine library. You create a reflection class instance for a class that you want to inspect, like our own article entity class. And then you would call the reader and say, get me the class annotations for this particular class. The reader will now look up all the annotations used in the class. It will try to load the classes that are really the annotations. So for instance, the column annotation that we used is really the column class inside the Doctrine ORM mapping namespace. But let's say we are doing this in an application that doesn't have Doctrine ORM installed. What will happen? Or really something like this. That was just too easy. It will say Doctrine ORM mapping column is not found. It's a class it's an unknown class. So basically this means that whenever you would like to use the article class in another application that uses annotations but doesn't have Doctrine ORM installed, you won't be able to do it. So that's a problem. And some people like Stan Lemon, maybe you know him from Twitter, he keeps asking me, well, yes, but are you ever going to use anything other than Doctrine ORM. Yes, well, no, and I agree with him that there is nothing, I think no real replacement of it, at least if you want to use a data mapper as the pattern for your persistence. But there are, within the Doctrine family, many ways of storing data. You have the MongoDB way of storing things, the CouchDB. Well, there are some other libraries out there that use a similar structure, and you can just persist any object as long as it has some mapping configuration. These are just some examples of annotations that you can use with such a library. So you want to make your classes, your entity classes, available in other applications that use maybe MongoDB to store their objects. So yes, if your goal is to go for reusability, portability, then you have to remove any annotations. And you have to find another way to map the data. Well, let's first remove the annotations anyway. You will end up with a nice popo. It's the plain old PHP object. And it's actually the ideal of the data mapper pattern. The idea is that you should be able to store any object in your application, put it in a database without looking, or when you look at the class itself, it won't be clear that it's going to be persisted in an actual database, be it a MySQL database or a MongoDB database. It doesn't, MongoDB, Mongo database. Anyway, we will have to find a different way to map the data. Of course, so if we were trying to store this object using Doctrine ORM, it won't be possible. We have to provide some mapping metadata. And this is an XML file, well, showing how we want to map each field to a database column. And, well, yes, again, I use XML since I like it so much. But as you can see, there's not really much to it. It's just the same thing as when you were using annotations. It says we have an ID, it is an integer, its column is ID, generate a strategy auto, field name, title, etc. It's just very easy. And when you have an editor that recognizes the XML schema, it will only be easier. It will, in fact, be much easier than using annotations, since when you use annotations, most of the time you don't know what you're doing really. The bundle conventions for XML metadata are, look like this. Whenever you have an entity inside your entity folder in the bundle, you have to put the XML metadata for it here, like resources config doctrine, and then the name of the entity .orm.xml. And Doctrine will automatically load your XML for you. But again, we don't want the metadata inside the bundle. So we are trying to move that out. And it's really easy. There's a nice trick. You have to install Doctrine bundle with a higher version than 1.2. I'm not sure if 1.2 is released as a stable version yet, but last time I was looking at this, you had to add the add-dev to your composer requirement. Once you have installed this bundle, you will have a compiler pass, which is able to modify service definitions and allows you to register your mapping metadata in other locations than just bundle locations. So if you look at the code, you will use the Doctrine ORM mappings path. Then you provide the path to the actual XML files containing the mapping metadata. You have the namespace prefix, mylibrary/model, or \model. And then you have to create this, this compiler path using the create XML mapping driver. And you provide a map of XML paths pointing to namespaces of entities. And that's really great. So now the new convention would be that, or convention, it's just configuration really, is that article entities, that the article entity is defined in source mylibrary doctrine article.orm.xml. Really great, and it can be anywhere at this point. So what have we achieved with regard to entities? Well, as I said, entity classes can now be anywhere. It's just that you have to provide the mapping metadata, but it is not part of the entity itself anymore. And also the mapping metadata can be anywhere, and it can be in any different format. So there is the YAML format, there's also PHP format. Well, in the end, entities are true popos, which we really wanted. And just looking at an entity class you won't recognize the fact that it is going to be used to be persisted somewhere. Well, the final step is templates. And these are quite hard, as we will see. Conventions for templates are that they have to be in resources views, and then you will have the folder called controller. The file name should be action.format.engine, usually html.twig, of course. But the real difficulty is that templates have many kinds of different dependencies, and they are very easy to decouple from, or very difficult to decouple from. For instance, templates can use global variables, and it's the same problem with using global variables in PHP. Sometimes they are available, sometimes they are not, and they affect global state, so really difficult. Also, functions are really registered using Twig extensions, but maybe the system or the application that is going to reuse your code or your templates doesn't have those functions registered. So you will never know if you are safe to use that function. A particularly hard one is that when you extend from a parent template like base.html.twig, it's very likely that in another application such a global template won't be available. Still, your template contains a reference to such a file, so that really makes it hard to decouple your template from the framework it was written for. Still, I want to try to move them out. It's up to the template designer or developer to make it as decoupled as possible, but at least I want to be able to put them anywhere in the application. And yes, it is possible. There is something in the configuration of the project. It's called the paths key and the Twig key. It allows you to provide an array of, well, again, some sort of mapping. You say on the left side you provide the location of your templates, and on the right side you provide the name which is used as, well, the template namespace. So if you have a line like this in your configuration, this allows you to put your templates anywhere and make them available using the @mylibrary annotation whenever you want to render a template. So this is already a step in the right direction. But as you have noticed maybe, well, first of all, you have to ask your users to add this line to their configuration file, which is a lot to ask, I think. Also, it's an absolute path. And probably my templates that I want to share are inside some kind of a reusable package installed using Composer. So at that time, I may not even know where it is. I may not know what the vendor/package name location would be. Well, of course, I can again hard-code it, but that makes it less portable. Maybe in another application, they are not inside the vendor/package name folder, but they are inside the core shared vendor anything directory. So we have to find a solution for that. We have to get rid of absolute path. And there is one great idea, and in fact it has been implemented already. It's by Bernard Schusek. He created forms and validation, and I think many other parts of Symfony. Just a very productive developer. I really admire his work. Well, the thing he created is called Puli, and well, it's a really nice name. But it allows you to find the absolute path of resources in a project. So wherever a resource is located, Puli will resolve its actual location for you, and you can still use some kind of a relative path. A quick example of using, or of manually using Puli is something like this. It has a resource repository. You create an instance of it, and you add basically a prefix. So you say anything that you require using /mylibrary/views will resolve to this absolute path. And you can use the asterisk to say, well, it can be anything inside that directory. And this means that if you ask it to give you the absolute path of some resource, say the index.html.twig file, it will give you the real path pointing to the actual location of that file, which is really nice. But it's even, well, of course, this is actually very easy to create. I think maybe if you were already thinking about an algorithm, it's really not that hard. But it becomes really powerful Oh, sorry, I just skipped some visual example. Basically, it just replaces the prefix, right? It just replaces the prefix with the actual location. But it becomes really powerful when you are allowed to, using the Puli Composer plugin, to expose resources from a package using just the resources key in your Composer JSON file. So if you have a package and you want to expose templates to the application that includes the package, you just have to add this key to your Composer file, saying, I want to expose resources in my own personal source/my-library/views directory, and I want to make them available everywhere in the application that includes my package as /my-library/views, and then anything. And this is very, very powerful. So wherever a package is located in your project, be it in the vendor directory or some other fancy place, you will be able to, for instance, render Twig templates like this. You have to install the Puli Twig extension, and then you can do something like this in your controller. You say this templating render /my-library/views /index.html.twig, and it actually points to the Twig file in the package that you have just included. And that's really great. So inside your own project, you can override these paths, so you can basically replace any resource that is offered to you by a package. Very, very interesting. It also offers many possibilities for reuse of resources outside of Symfony applications. So like I already mentioned templates, but you can also think of translation files, which may be meaningful to other applications out there too. Maybe, well, like the XLIF standard is not really Symfony specific, so it might make sense to expose your translation files in other applications that don't use Symfony. Maybe even mapping metadata. We provided an absolute path to that. We might be able to provide a relative path to that. And maybe even service definitions, which is also quite interesting. It would allow a package to offer service definitions for all its classes. So if you would install a package that contains some service definitions, it might be possible to automatically register those services just by using Puli. It's totally awesome. The list is longer and longer. So I really think the future is bright for reusability. And I think even though Puli is not yet stable, well, currently it's just in an alpha version. Yeah, but I still think it has lots of potential. Even with some minor effort from my side, I was able to get it running in my application. I really expect much from it. So Puli will be the ultimate tool to create naked bundles. Of course, that is not the real purpose. I think it's the most important part of Puli is that it helps to expose resources to other applications that don't use Symfony, of course. And it can be many types of resources, many more than you thought of. So you are used to sharing your PHP code, but you can also share controllers, templates, translation files, anything really. And the wonderful thing is it is not really limited to your project boundaries, not even to projects that use the same framework. Maybe it's not even limited to the current language, PHP. If you would write a Puli implementation for other languages, you would be able to share packages from the PHP community with other communities, like the Ruby community or anything. So that's quite something, really. And still, if you don't want to try Puli or want to wait until Puli becomes available, there is a lot to do if you want not to rely that much on your framework. It's an effort which is good in itself, I think. I really think that you should need to remember from this that the framework is for you, like for you and for me. As you notice, just being at a conference, it becomes totally clear that the framework is there for you. You are going to have a better life when you use a framework. But your code doesn't really need it. So you always have to keep in mind, if you try to type hint against some kind of a framework class or you want to follow a certain framework convention, is this really needed? And if you decide to go that way, you are going to trust the framework, you are going to rely on the things that the framework offers. Make it a conscious decision. this is the end, really. Do you have any questions for me right now?
Hi.
Hi.
What is the difference between using Puli and constants?
The difference between Puli and constants? Constants like full paths or?
Like PHP constants, just.
Ah, right. Well, I would say constants are not possible to use because, well, as I said, the real locations of resources can be anywhere, so it won't be a fixed.
Yeah, but Puli only translate the prefix to full path. If we use constants instead of this prefix, it will be the same.
I'm not sure if I don't see an option for constants here, but can you explain a bit more about this?
Well, if you use like constants in, I don't know, in old Zend application in Bootstrap, like application path or path to your views, then instead of using Puli, you can use constant dot and the.
Right. But this moves the responsibility for pointing the application to exact locations to the application configuration.
Yes, but constant is also configuration. You can change the constant the same you can change config.
No, that's right. But if that constant would be part of the application configuration, then you would have to ask the user who is going to use your bundle or your package to add that constant to their configuration.
Now you are asking user to change the config. So
yes, but that is my purpose. I don't want the users to change their config because they want to use my resources. So Puli really exposes on its own its resources. So or no, Puli allows packages to expose its own resources.
Okay, I just don't like to get, I don't know, install something that is already in the language, or I can reuse the part of the language. Well, maybe I have to research that, but...
Yes, I can imagine, but I currently feel that there is no way the language could support this, except for there being some kind of autoloader for things other than classes. But Puli really is something like an autoloader for other things than classes. Thanks. Other questions? Oh, I finally see your faces now. I should have done this earlier.
Basically, you just use rely on request and HTTP foundation, right, in that controller. And how about console command? I think that better way is just to design our application in such way that we can just pass stuff to some use cases classes or some services classes. Yeah. Right.
I totally agree with you. So this was really an exercise in coupling to find out where are the actual points of contact between your code and the framework. And I really think that controllers in the end are not very suitable for reuse. So I have tried to show that it could be possible in theory, with still depending on the HTTP foundation component. But in the end, I always end up with some sort of Symfony-specific package that still creates a bridge between my bundle and my model code, including commands. That's true. Still, I think there's a lot of things possible to, like you said, create some good services, use case objects or command objects. That is really the way to go if you want to decouple your application. Yes. I think that would have been a different talk, an interesting talk, nonetheless. The purpose here was to, well, trigger you to think about which things really have to be in a bundle. And could maybe be moved outside. Yeah. All right, so one note on this part. I don't think that you have to move these things outside the bundle. It's possible, and after taking all these steps, it's even very easy to move entities, controllers, templates outside of the bundle. But it's also, well, your bundle is already quite a lot better if you follow all these advices and still keep those things inside the bundle. You don't have to do this extra step of moving them out. So that's just something I wanted to add. Yeah. Thanks. Other questions? Not right now. All right. My book has a nice discount. Because some commercial messages right now. The slides are already available on Joined-In. So you can just download them as PDF files and click on the links and you will get this discount. Also my second book, which covers not only general design principles for classes, but also design principles for packages, which may be lesser known design principles. You can get it for right now with a nice discount. Also, you have to know that it's 70% done. So I'm not selling a finished product here. But once you buy it, you will get all the new chapters for free, of course. So thank you for being here. I'm really happy that you were here listening to my somewhat maybe exotic ideas about bundles. If you have some feedback for me, go to the Joined-In page or talk to me, for instance, on Twitter. Also, thanks Sally Mackenzie for the naked bundle. All right, that's it. Thanks.